Hi everyone, welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's new social environment. I'm Catherine, I'll be your MC today. A few quick notes before we get started. We'll be recording this for the Rail archive, so if you prefer not to be seen, you can disable your camera by pressing the stop video button in the bottom left corner of your screen. We'll keep the audience on mute until question time, which I'll kick off about halfway through the talk. Feel free to introduce yourself, where you're from, in the chat to your right. If you have questions while the conversation is happening, you can write them in the chat and I'll call on you during the Q&A. If we have to lock down the chat bar, just send your questions directly to me. Our production assistants, Miko and Emily, will be typing closed captions to make our talk more accessible today. And now to introduce our guests. Adma Walker was appointed Principal Flute of the London Symphony Orchestra in 2009. He performs internationally as a soloist with leading orchestras, and as a chamber musician, he regularly appears at major concert venues and festivals. He's also a Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center's Bowers Program artist. He studied at Chatham School of Music in Manchester and the Royal Academy of Music in London. He's also a professor of flute at London's Royal College of Music. Our host today, George Grella, is a musician and writer. His performing experience includes jazz, classical, improvised music at CBGB, the Original Knitting Factory, and Weil Recital Hall. As a composer, he's produced chamber music, opera, electronic music, and has created music for dance and cartoons. He serves as the Brooklyn Rail's music editor and as critic for the New York Classical Review, and he's the author of Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, published by Bloomsbury. And now I'll hand it off to George.
Well, first of all, welcome everyone for joining us in this conversation, and welcome Adam. Adam, your screen name is not clear, so would you wave? Yeah, that's Adma Walker right there.
This is a computer, so I apologize for any mishaps that may happen.
He and I are going to be talking about an experience, a mutual experience we had from the inside and the outside. Going back to March 12th, which was a Thursday, this was an evening where the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center had a concert scheduled in what they call their New Milestones program, which is presenting important experimental and modern music from the 20th and 21st century. I was scheduled to attend that concert and review it for the New York Classical Review, but it was that day that the Chamber Music Society and some other venues closed up their halls to audiences because of the coronavirus. And what the Chamber Music Society did for this concert and the following one was to live stream it, which is what they've always been doing in the past. But in this case, it was a live stream of a live concert with no audience. And I viewed it from home, and it was an unusual experience. And we're going to talk about that kind of quarantine hall experience as a listener and also as a performer. And in particular, Adam, you played in a piece that was a world premiere, and this was a world premiere with the composer in attendance without an audience. Without an audience in front of you, although there were people on the viewers' end, we could see how many people were viewing. And I just want to ask you for the first question is, what's it like to play in that kind of situation, give a premiere, and there's nobody there to listen to you?
Well, I mean, that whole period was such a bizarre and unsettling time for all of us. It still is. So I suppose in context, everything at the time felt somewhat strange and out of place. I actually live most of the time when I'm not working in Italy. My partner's Italian, so I kind of had a little bit of a heads up as to how things were developing in that part of the world. I actually haven't been able to go home for several months now as a result of this and being away from home before I was in New York. So already things were kind of strange. The week before this New Milestones concert, I'd been doing another project with CMS, Chamber Music Society, and it was a fairly standard week, and we did concerts and rehearsals as you would expect. And then the day of this concert, we got a message to say, you know, the rules had changed with regards to public events and the virus, and there would no longer be able to be an audience in physical attendance. However, the Chamber Music Society live stream quite a lot of their concerts, or no, they don't live stream, that's not true, they record a lot of their concerts. And this was one which they were due to live stream anyway. So the plan was we would go ahead with live streaming the concert as planned, but with no audience. It was, in a way, a very surreal experience. On another hand, as musicians, we're used to not always playing in you know, totally normal circumstances, and we do radio broadcasts, and we have all at some point done filming without an audience. But gearing up for this event, imagining that there would, or just taking for granted there would be an audience, of course it was very odd to not have one for various different reasons. But I think we still pulled off a nice event in the end. How exactly, what kind of things would you be interested to know about my take on the experience in particular?
Well, one thing is that it seemed to me, as a listener and a viewer, that there was a particular intensity in the playing, not just the piece that you were playing on, but the entire concert. But it wasn't the type of intensity where an emotional intensity, or a kind of expressing, you know, really sharp-edged feelings of any kind. But it seemed there was such intense concentration and focus from the musicians. There was, you know, and I'm saying this as you and all your colleagues, you know, you are very fine musicians, and this is what you do. You play together beautifully, but there seemed to be an even sharper and more immediate quality of everybody listening to each other and following each other's phrases. It was more of a music making spontaneity than really reading off a score. And again, that's just what it sounded like to me as a listener. And I'm wondering what it was like again for you guys playing.
So I was playing in two pieces that day. Alexandre Dubois' new work, which you were mentioning, Heron Blossom Rain, and another piece by French composer Tristan Murail.
Mm-hmm.
And for me and the musicians that I was working with, it was actually the first time we'd performed both of these pieces. Nobody had performed this music before. So already from that perspective, I think when you're performing something for the first time with an audience, as well as without an audience, there's going to be a particular flavor amongst what's happening. I think if you're playing a warhorse of a piece, like, I don't know, for example, the Schubert octet or whatever, like a well-known piece of the repertoire, and you're playing it for the umpteenth time, I think there is going to be a difference of approach and difference of feeling in the performance. I think when you're playing something for the first time, you're in a way much more focused on getting it right, or you know, making as much of a colourful performance as you can for the composer. So in that sense, I have to say, for my own experience of the concert, that was the presiding kind of concentration. And because I don't have a library of past performances of these works, in terms of the pieces I played, I can't really compare them to performances of the past because it was the first time. So that might have also helped that feeling of deep concentration. I have to say also, with the premiere we gave of Alexandra's piece, she was there. She was the audience, basically, who was in the room, the live audience. So, you know, having worked on the piece with her and then having her there for the premiere, we were also, I would say, we were performing to her. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it was still a performance. I think, you know, when there are cameras or microphones present at a recording, especially for something that's live streamed, that does add another kind of presence to the concert. You could say concentration, you could say
Mm-hmm.
pressure, you could name it on as several different things. But as someone who's performed in, you know, varying different circumstances with or without recordings, I can say that on the whole it does add a certain dimension to the performance. In ways it can enhance it, in ways sometimes it can add a certain amount of you might not take as many risks, for example, in terms of performance, with a camera next to you. So
Really.
all these things add to it as well.
Really, that surprises me. It seems, this is just my intuitive feeling, that if you're playing a concert and there's an audience there, do you think about how the audience is responding to the music while you're playing? And wouldn't that, without an audience there, wouldn't that give you some more possibilities or more freedom in some way?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we knew that there could be up to several thousand people watching, and I think
Yes.
there were.
Yeah,
So there is an audience, and in a way, for me personally, having an audience there, a live audience, this atmosphere that's created, we can't really quantify it, we can't explain it, is there.
yeah.
And without that physical live audience, there is definitely something missing. There's an element missing. And I think with these human bodies there experiencing with you the music, in a way that would spur me on more to take risks, because I
Okay.
feel there's a almost physical, you know, communication going on, and that's what kind of, you know, what we do as musicians should have kind of physical effects on the listener. It's not just a case of people going and listening to music, it's a shared experience. And I think when people are there in the room, that can spur you on in different
Mhm.
ways to the being on the end of a screen somehow.
Well, then, did you feel, because you, as you mentioned, that Alexandra Dubois was there to hear the world premiere of her piece, was that an appreciable difference from your experience playing that and playing the Tristan Muraille piece, when it was only you and the musicians playing for each other?
Very, in a way, a very different experience,
Mm-hmm.
because I have to say the Tristan Muraille piece was incredibly dense. There were 1,100,000 instructions per bar. It's like our minds were just constantly going, and we were kind of in panic mode in a good way. You know, I mean, a lot of performances you need that kind of not testosterone. That's totally the wrong.
The tension.
Adrenaline, sorry, to get you through, and that piece had that in buckets, and it was very busy and intense. Whereas Alexandra Dubois' piece was also extremely concentrated, but very not sparse. I mean, in at times sparse, but very kind of meditative and linear in the way she wrote it. It was she took influence of this piece from Buddhist traditions and ancient Japanese poetry, and I believe that she wrote this piece knowing that it was going to be performed in a chamber-sized hall.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, I think, you know, that was part of the influence of the piece, and it was creating a very intense but very different feeling to the Muraille. And in a way, actually not having the kind of normal concert experience and having this empty space, in a way aided us, I think, to create this feeling of calm within the room. And all chamber music is conversational. You know, the artists are having this dialogue between each other, and I think we entered this very concentrated space of mind collectively, and actually having this empty hall kind of, in a funny way, helped create that sense of stillness and intensity that we got.
It's interesting to hear that, in fact, and I think that's an excellent lead into us sharing some of that performance. I think now is a good time to play, you know, play some of the clip that we have from the Chamber Music Society so
Okay.
that everyone can have an idea of what the music actually sounded like.
Do you want me to
So
start that now?
yeah, let's play about, I don't know. I mean, I think we can relax and maybe play a couple minutes of this.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let
Okay.
me just get that set up.
It looks like you've got it. I that gives you some idea of the quality of the music, but also I find that just seeing that again, that the conclusion there of the performance, I find quite moving. There's nobody there, but you are doing you stand up and take a bow, just like it's the old concert ritual, and that's the composer who comes up on stage, and
Mm,
it's really this kind of experience amongst yourselves that we're eavesdropping on and viewing, and it's quite, I don't know, I found it a lot more touching to see that with
mm,
nobody there. And I really can't quite put my finger on why. There's something about, there's something more almost pure about the music making, I think,
mm,
because you're not in a position where you can really please anybody, and where you can get that, as you said, the feedback of having the bodies in the room, but you're still making music together, and you're still, and it's kind of a rare thing now for the time being, but making music is a social activity, and you're still together making
mm.
music together, and the composer there as well, and it's really kind of a, like, almost a private experience between all of you that we had the chance to view.
Mm. I get that. I mean, I think what you said about it seeming more pure or honest, something like this, resonates somewhat. The whole format felt quite different. There were various different groupings for each piece. And so basically, those of us who weren't on stage performing were kind of hanging out at the back of the hall, which wouldn't normally be, doable, but there we were. The whole construct of backstage, that curtain, be it real or imaginary, kind of, you know, separating audience from musicians wasn't there.
Right.
And that kind of process that you normally go through of doing your scales backstage and then being thrust onto the stage to rapturous applause and bowing, and that wasn't there. And that was quite strange. I mean, it did leave you feeling slightly more vulnerable in a funny way. The cool side of that was, you know, we got to sit and watch each other play, and that was really nice. And even to be a part of the logistical side of things, like, you know, we got a briefing before we went on stage of this will happen, then so and so will come up and do the chat and blah blah. So we were part of this experience in quite a different way to how we would normally be. So that was quite funny. And yeah, it was. It felt almost a little silly going on stage in concert clothes to an empty hall and no applause. You know, it was kind of strange. It felt almost just weird. But I think the moment we started playing, then it felt it was super concentrated and it felt as normal. Bowing afterwards, that was quite funny. The rest of the musicians who were sat at the back of the hall, myself included, in the pieces I wasn't in, you know, the gut instinct after people is to clap, and it was like, because we were told not to.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, because I think rightly, because if a couple of people had clapped, it would have sounded a bit weird, you know. We were told to appreciate the music in a different way. So it was kind of strange you want to do these things, and to bow after that performance, to silence felt kind of weird, you know. It makes you question the format of these things if they're online but without a live audience in the hall. It makes you wonder how actually we could present things slightly differently, maybe a little bit more informal, or I don't know. It was definitely interesting.
Well, that is certainly, that's an enormous topic, actually. It's a little too enormous for anyone to get their head around at the moment, I think. But one thing that I was surprised to hear that you were instructed not to applaud when you were listening to the other performances, and it makes me think that. And again, it's a whole other topic, the history of applause and why we applaud and what that means and how long we've been doing it. But there's something to be said about that not applauding as part of the experience. It's usually in a more experimental setting, like at La Montagnon's Dream House, where the idea is to come in silently and to be there for listen to music for 3 hours and then get up silently and leave. And I think that, from my perspective, seeing it from home, there was no loss of appreciation. I would say that I wasn't sharing it with anybody else in any audience. I was just seeing it by myself. But it seemed as if the bow seemed to be quite natural. And what I mean by that is, it's not, you've done this 100 times, you've played a piece of music and you stand up and you take a bow, and I can understand that even the muscle memory would take over and make you do that. But it seemed as if it was conclusive in a real sense. And also from my personal feeling, there was a benefit, because I go to so many performances that are fantastic performances, and when the last note dies away, as a listener, I just kind of want to hear that transition from that silence to the reaction, but there's a compulsion frequently of immediate applause, or even applause kind of stamping out the last note, and it shocks the system back into the normal everyday rather than the listening experience.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Seeing it from in the quarantine perspective, it's nothing but the listening experience. It's nothing but music and then silence and then music. And it was quite, in its own way, it opens up a whole other perspective, and it was quite wonderful.
True, and I suppose also, you know, like people at home, it's not like the physical experience of being in the concert hall where, you know, if you do get up and walk out, you look kind of not very nice.
Yes.
Whereas if you're watching from the comfort of your living room or wherever, you have that choice. If you want, you can leave the concert. You can do what you want. You can drink. You can chat. You know, it's up to you how intensely you want to be there. But you know, for those people who did stay and listen intently to the whole thing, you know, whenever we're on stage, we're always playing for certain people. You know, we're playing for the people we know who need it, and we're playing for the people who, you know, think they won't like it, and you want them to. And there's always an intent and a purpose there. So even if the audience are not there live, you know, we bowed because we still are appreciating the listeners. You know, it's showing that we appreciated the presence, even though we couldn't see it, of people listening and saying thank you. And also obviously to Alexandra who was there. So
well, I found myself spontaneously applauding. Well, and again, this is to give more of my perspective from the other end too, which is that I tuned into the concert right when it was supposed to start, right from the beginning. The first piece was the Schoenberg String Trio, Opus 45, and there were about 9,000 people who were tuned in at the very beginning, and by the time that piece was over, there was down to about 2,000 people. So it's what you're talking about, where people who didn't want to hear Schoenberg, they tuned out. But that meant there were still a few thousand people listening, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that experience of the music stops and you're just applauding because it was very affecting. And I think in that case, you go to a concert, you're sitting among your audience, there's all these social cues going on sub rosa, even during the piece. And even if you're not so much enjoying the piece, well, you know, it goes on and it ends and you applaud and everyone applauds. And the streaming concert, the quarantine streaming concert without an audience, it's just you and the music. And if you react that way, if the music is gripping you and you're just concentrating on it and listening to it, it says everything about the quality of the music and also the quality of the performance, that it transcends that the kind of obligatory ritual, concert going ritual. And it's just really, you're applauding because it was just damn good.
Yeah, that's cool. It would be nice if we could have seen, you know, all you lot. But
yeah, like this.
Yeah.
You know, everybody tuning in via Zoom to the Chamber Music Society, and you can see a whole array of faces on the screen while you're you're standing up.
I mean, it's strange. I mean, the thing is, after we'd all finished playing, you know, we were there in the hall, and it was quite nice. There wasn't that usual like scramble to get to the nearest bar and ordering a drink. We just stayed and like we had a little toast to Alex, the composer, and we were all still there in the same space, the same team who began the experience all together. An hour and whatever before, and there we were kind of recapping, which was really nice because it doesn't always happen. The only thing, and you know, it was cool because we had then a dialogue with Alex, and it was funny because, just to go off on a slight tangent, before the event, I saw her and she was, you know, obviously a little bit sad that there wasn't going to be an audience, also because her piece is very much about breathing and music and how the two are connected, and that's a collective shared experience. But even so, she was extremely happy with the performance, and she liked it. So, but to have that dialogue with the composer straight away, all the musicians together, and was great. Obviously, the only thing that we did miss was like contact with the audience. You know, we didn't get people coming to say, "I love the way you did this. What did that mean?" That was obviously missing, but I'm sure if, you know, this was to become a more common occurrence, then things would adapt. But you even after the concert, you kind of did miss the audience in that respect as well.
Well, also along with the audience not being there and the things coming to a conclusion, whether it was just the pieces that you were playing or the entire concert. I think if I remember, there were 4 pieces on the concert, but I realized seeing it again too that there was something poignant about that finishing the last notes, taking a breath, standing up and bowing, that sense of finality, because look what's happening. We're closing up the hall and we don't know when we're going to be back here. It's easy to say that now after we've been shut in for 5 weeks or so, but was there any kind of feeling or thought like that going on?
To be honest, I mean, we were so snowed under with notes in a positive way. Our main things was, our main thought processing, I think I can speak for myself, especially with regards to the other piece that I was in, was get from beginning to end. And it was more relief, there's always, after a first performance of a work, there will always be that sense, hopefully, of positive relief after it's finished. And I think when I look back to the occasion, I was happy for the composer that it went well, and for my colleagues, and we'd had fun. I think the adrenaline still stays in your system. I think that definitely we all registered what could be happening, and as I say, I'm based a lot of the time in Italy, in northern Italy, where actually was the epicenter of the coronavirus, and I'd seen what was happening there in the weeks leading up to this, and I was acutely aware that probably this was gonna be the last concert I did kind of in public for quite some time. So of course, there was that poignancy attached to the situation. Also, though, to be honest, I'm glad that it came across that way when we were bowing. I remember the first time I bowed, I was kind of trying not to laugh because it just kind of felt like really weird. Bowing without an audience. I kind of felt like I was back at 10 years old and learning how to bow, and it was in that sense, it kind of felt all a little bit fabricated. But I think really whatever we were bowing because that's what we do after a performance. It's our way of acknowledging the audience, and I think we were acknowledging to each other in our playing as well. We were enjoying the conversational aspects of the concert and of chamber music, because I think we knew that it would be a while that we would be playing in the same room as our colleagues. So I think many musical concerts, not just classical music, across the world, that week, people were really giving their all, I think. And communicating to whoever and whatever in the most personal way possible.
I understand that, and I think it comes through, and I think it came through in that experience, and in a very positive way, without any kind of I don't know, I guess the word is desperation, doubt about what might come next. I want to talk to you about one more thing, and I think we can answer some questions that people might have. But you're in a situation as a musician. What you do is you do your work with other people, and so what has this been like for you as a musician? How do you, specifically as a musician, what do you do with your artistic practice when you cannot get together with other people and play or perform in front of an audience?
I have to say, I stopped.
Okay.
I mean, I was in New York when it all kicked off, and my flight back to Italy was cancelled, and I was due to spend a lot of March and April in London on various different projects, and I kind of knew they'd be cancelled, but I couldn't fly home anyway, so I went to London. Lo and behold, all my work was gone. Musicians, mainly freelance musicians in the UK, we're not salaried. We get paid for service. Panic ensued, but everyone is panicking, not just musicians, but self-employed people. I was kind of homeless. I was staying with a friend in London. I've managed to make it up to York, as in Old York. I'm staying with family. I've been self-isolating for a couple of weeks. To be honest, I mean, a lot of us musicians, we work like crazy. We travel around a hell of a lot. it's wonderful, and we do it because we love it, but it's also insane and intense. And I think even when you don't have your diary full of concerts for a specific period, you have to stay in shape.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just stop, and there's always that next thing looming over you, like even if it's a month where you have that concert and this. We're very lucky for that, but at the same time, we rarely get to properly stop. And actually this horrible situation we're in, and we're all trying to make what we can out of it and think positively and hope it's going to be okay. I have to say, for me, it has been an opportunity to stop. I put the flute in its case, and I opened it the other day, but it's been about 3 weeks that I've just I told my students to also take a break.
Yeah.
And then we're going to pick things up digitally. That will be interesting. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to that or not. We'll see. I've heard mixed reports. And I think my point is, as musicians now, we have space and time, which are two very precious things that we don't have very often. And whilst we're not playing with each other musically, you know, I mean, some people are using platforms to create, like the Rotterdam Phil played the last movement of Beethoven 9 digitally, which is very cool and very impressive. But, you know, it's a different kind of thing. I think a lot of us are practicing for ourselves in a way that we haven't done since we were young students, you know, practicing for the sake of wanting to play 2 notes for no other reason is actually kind of a special thing to do. And I think I'm very grateful for this time to slow down, and it does make you think about what we do and the amount of travel we do, and you know, what the future holds. And it's time for reflecting and looking after each other the best we can.
Yes. Well, thank you, Adma. It's wonderful to talk to you about this.
Thank you. Thanks.
And if I believe, Catherine, this is now when we have some questions, if people have any.
Yeah, so we'll switch to Q&A now if you guys are ready.
Sure.
Our first question comes from Miko, who is typing our closed captions today, so I'll read it for her. The question is, do you think the dynamic between audience and performer, like the backstage and being behind the curtain, will change once sheltering in place ends? I'm just wondering if you have any ideas of what the future of performing might look like.
If things go back to normal in some kind of sense, and we go back to a concert format that is common to us, I think as a performer, there is a certain kind of animal that takes over when you're on stage. It sounds kind of corny or cheesy or whatever, but there's a kind of persona attached to you when you're performing. And I think I have a ritual backstage where we all do, where we build up to going on stage and performing. And I think when you're suddenly hit by that energy of applause and people and new information, it does something, and it does change. And I think there will always be that distinction between being on stage and off stage and the preparation. In terms of relationship with audiences, I mean, I think it's another aspect of this whole thing, you know, this whole experience at the moment, where we don't take things for granted in the same way. And actually, I suppose when this is over, I personally would like to think of ways in which I can connect better with the audience in terms of, you know, discussion of the music, for example, or what people's views are on as an audience member in terms of the format of classical music concerts. In broader general terms, a little bit more dialogue between audience and performer. I hope I got the right end of the stick there.
Well, and I would like to add from a critic's perspective that there's a lot of classical music institutions, I have, they've been needing to rethink everything they do for quite a while now, for all sorts of reasons, social reasons, especially economic reasons, getting in audiences, approaching audiences, expanding audiences. And now, I mean, this is the crisis and opportunity to think about what might be different and to see what can work in, you know, in these instances where they're forced to do something. And I hope that there will be more thinking through things from the very bottom up, you know, every step of the way, you know, everything from, you know, why is the stage the way it is, to why are we holding it in this, you know, why are we putting an opera in front of 4,000 people when we can do it in front of 1,000 people, things like that. I mean, this is something that institutions are right now in the moment being forced to think about, and I hope that they really do. I hope they really do.
Well, I mean, I can speak for myself. I mean, I'm somebody who kind of ferries myself around playing, and I'm not organizing events in that sense. You know, I turn up and I play, and now I do a little bit more of thinking outside the box and stuff. But a lot of us as performers, you know, we turn up at a concert, and we play the music, and even I have to say myself, in this experience, you have to think, you know, what happens if we can't travel in the way that we used to? Should we be traveling the way that we used to? How can we perform and engage audiences within our own local community? These kind of things, I have to say, I didn't think about enough in the past, and I still need to, you know, it's not something that I've thought enough about. And I think this experience does make us question a lot of the traditions that we have, as well as just habit. And, you know, people giving concerts now from their mobile phones, whatever, in their living room, it would, for me, it would kind of look ridiculous if they were playing in a tuxedo. You know, like, why? It would look stiff and out of place. And for some people, you know, the thought of going to a concert hall and maybe being dressed up or whatever is really alienating or intimidating or whatever. And actually seeing a top class performer play in their home and have this very kind of intimate dialogue with the listener, that is enough to kind of make you think differently and think outside the box, and how music can connect.
I just want to add, we're going into this in some detail now, but I think you're opening up some really important things too, which is that some of the situation we find ourselves in the concert hall is very much a modern artifact, and that music that you're playing, chamber music society, if you're playing up there with 3 people, 4 people for one of these pieces, for so long, these performances were essentially done in a person's living room. You know, in front of tidy audiences, for friends. I mean, a lot of it had to do with hierarchical class structure and monarchy and things like that. But composers up and through the time of Beethoven weren't even imagining that this was going to be something that, oh, we've got to put this in front of 1,000 people. I mean, it just was not how music was experienced. So what you're doing when you play from your living room, or when you play without an audience there, and there's the intimate connection even through the screen, it's very much historical, and not, despite the technology, it's not ahistorical. While the contemporary concert experience and the way people dress and the ritual and things like that, that is more ahistorical if you look at the long history of music performance.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, also, I mean, in terms of orchestral playing as well, I mean, I think that playing chamber music in your living room is one thing, but how would an orchestral setting and with all these people, and how would that differ? And actually, just in general, in terms of orchestral concerts as well, do people really resonate from seeing like men dressed in kind of penguin suit tuxedos anymore? Is that really, I mean, from my personal perspective, what's great about tuxedos is that you can put them in a ball and you don't have to iron them. But apart from that, it just feels a little archaic, you know, like playing in this kind of, there are definite things to think about. Well, that's interesting what you were saying about, you know, music in a kind of domestic setting. It's, you know, it's true. And, you know, people at certain points in the past would have been able to go and top their drink up and chat a little bit. And I think, to be honest, as a performer, I think I would kind of find, at the risk of sounding snobby, I think I would find it really annoying if people were chatting, even if I was playing, you know, like a Weber trio or something that wasn't necessarily written for the concert hall. I think I would find it annoying if people were chatting and giggling and flirting in the background. But at the same time, you know, why shouldn't people be able to go and get another glass of wine and relax and stuff as well? I don't know. There's lots of questions there.
Okay, so our next question comes from Charlie. Charlie, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adam and George. This has been a really stimulating and interesting conversation. I wanted to go back to a point that you had talked about earlier when you mentioned adrenaline. And I was basically wondering, with no live audience to feed your adrenaline, where else did it come from? And you mentioned concentration being intense just because of the nature of the premiere and the music. But I wonder, did that equal the amount of adrenaline that you would normally feel when you walk out to rapturous applause? Or did that feeling of adrenaline come back in equal measure from somewhere else? Or just kind of where it came from?
It's a funny one, you know, because, I mean, for me personally, and I think for quite a lot of other musicians I know, I actually feel much more kind of calm, collected, confident playing in front of 3,000 people than in front of 3 people. Like, actually, I would find it more nerve-wracking playing in someone's living room than I would playing in a big concert hall. So, I mean, it's a strange one because you know that there could be thousands of people watching on the other end of the camera, but also in the hall there were maybe 2 or 3 people there, including the composer. So in that sense, I think that's why I still had adrenaline, because for me personally, playing in front of smaller, more intimate groups is actually scarier than playing in front of a large scale group. The other piece, the Mirai, in which the composer wasn't there, I had adrenaline because I know to get from A to Z, or Z, sorry, without messing up was kind of on a knife edge. So we were all a bit like, I have to say with Alex's piece, not so much adrenaline when we started walking on into this setup, having sat at the back of the hall, definitely some adrenaline, but her piece was quite magical in that it is about breath and the way breath and music and the mind all relate. And I think her piece kind of forced us into this calm, meditative state. And I think, to be honest, even if there had been an audience, I can't imagine it would have felt kind of, if we managed to get to that place where I think we indeed were, I don't think we would have even noticed the audience that much. Sorry to sound cruel, but I think we were all very calm.
Thank you, Adam.
Okay, so we have time for one more question, and that will come from JC. JC, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Adam, thanks so much for coming. Actually, it's great that you returned to that piece of music, because that's sort of what my question's about. You were talking before about the breath kind of implicating the audience in a certain way, but it also feels relevant to like our new awareness about bodies and lungs and breath as this like sort of site of anxiety, or also just thing that we're focused on in like a new way. And I guess it got me curious, like if there's other kinds of work or like formal considerations that you would feel drawn to now that you maybe wouldn't before, given like the new format of performing in these like more intimate ways.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear everything you said. Sorry.
Sorry, I know I'm like whispering into my computer. I'll do that again kind of quickly. So so you were talking about like the breath in that piece being a really important thing. And that felt relevant to me with the way that we're really aware about our breath kind of and our bodies in that way. And so I was just wondering if there are other like formal considerations or pieces of music that you feel drawn to now in ways that you maybe didn't before.
I think the format of that piece also, it wasn't, there were 3 movements, but they weren't necessarily meant to be played in the order that we played them. They were interchangeable. And I think as musicians, we often think about the form of a piece, it's the way we are instructed to approach a piece of music. We have to analyze the form subconsciously or not, And I think what really intrigued me about Alex's piece was that this traditional sense of form was kind of abstract and very linear. And in one instance, I actually would like to experience more of her music. I wasn't familiar with her name before, so I'd like to explore some of that. She was also talking about Rothko and the influence of Rothko in her work, and that's something that I would like to go into. I think it's quite interesting, like, from everything that we've discussed today, and it did get me thinking about the physical relationship and the physical presence of an audience and that link between performer and audience, how music actually physically affects us, how tone affects us, how musical intent physically can affect the listener. And as a performer, that's what we really feel the lack of that in this kind of situation. And I think I would definitely be interested in finding out about more pieces that relate to meditation, as Alex's did, and as you say, breathing, this kind of human, side of her music. No particular pieces. I mean, there's a piece by Matthias Pincher written for the flute that is, again, takes its inspiration from breath. Yeah, but I think the main thing is it really gave us a heightened awareness of that physicality and that link between performer and audience.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam and George, for your thoughts today. This conversation was super cool and interesting. So as many of you know, we end our lunches with a poem. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone tomorrow that we have a conversation with Alexis Rockman and Mark Dion tomorrow at 1 p.m. Same link, same time. Make sure to join. And now we'll move to our poet.
Catherine, if you don't mind, I just want to interrupt 1 second and encourage everyone to go to that Chamber Music Society link and see the whole concert. Experience this the entire piece. Yeah. The entire Alexandre Dubois piece, which is quite beautiful. The Murai piece is fascinating. The theme of the concert was essentially music that gets out of equal temperament and begins with Schoenberg's piece, which is really gripping, and it ends with Ben Johnston's String Quartet No. 4, which is an incredible microtonal arrangement of Amazing Grace, and it is one of the most enthralling pieces of music that you're ever going to hear. It's extraordinary.
I put the link in the chat, but make sure to go to Chamber Music Society's website and view the full performance. It's really beautiful and very meditative. Okay, so we'll just end our time with a poem read by one of our staff members. And JC, you'll be our poet today.
Yeah, more of me. This is a poem by the Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh, who was a farmer poet, and is called Inniskeen Road, July Evening. The bicycles go by in 2s and 3s. There's a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight. And there's the half-top code of mysteries and the wink and elbow language of delight. 8:30, and there's not a spot upon a mile of road, no shadow thrown that might turn out a man or woman, not a footfall trapping secrecies of stone. I have what every poet hates, in spite of all that solemn talk of contemplation. Oh, Alexander Selkirk knew the plight of being king and government and nation, a road, a mile of kingdom, I am king of banks and stones and every blooming thing. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone. Remember to tune in for tomorrow.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. And hope to be staying in touch. And keep up good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Fawn. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Justin. Bye, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you guys, Stacy, everyone.
Bye, Mark.
Good afternoon.
Bye, Laura.
Bye.